What happens when one of country music's most beloved stars walks onto a daytime talk show stage and the conversation takes a turn nobody saw coming? Faith Hill, known for her grace under pressure and her powerhouse voice, found herself in the middle of a live television moment that had viewers picking up their phones, rewinding their DVRs, and flooding social media with reactions. This wasn't your typical celebrity interview where everyone smiles, laughs at scripted jokes, and promotes their latest project. This was raw, this was real, and this was about to become one of the most talked about moments in daytime television history. Before we dive into what went down, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think about what you're about to witness. Trust me, you're going to have opinions. Faith Hill arrived at the View studio that morning expecting a straightforward appearance. She was there to discuss her return to music after taking time away from the spotlight, her family life, and perhaps share a few stories about her legendary career. The audience was packed, the energy was high, and the co-hosts were ready at the table. Whoopi Goldberg opened the show with her usual warmth, welcoming Faith to the stage as the crowd erupted in applause. Faith, wearing an elegant cream-colored blazer and her signature blonde hair falling in soft waves, smiled and waved as she made her way to the guest seat. The first few minutes went exactly as planned. Whoopi asked about Faith's new music, and Faith spoke passionately about rediscovering her love for creating after spending years focused on being a mother. Sarah N. chimed in with questions about balancing career and family, and Faith answered with a kind of genuine thoughtfulness that has always made her relatable despite her superstar status. Sunny Hostin brought up Faith's philanthropic work, and again, Faith handled the questions with grace and enthusiasm. Known for her sharp wit and her tendency to steer conversations into unexpected territory, leaned forward with a question that immediately shifted the atmosphere in the studio. Faith, you've been married for over 20 years, which in Hollywood terms is like a century. Joy began, getting a few chuckles from the audience. What's the secret? Because let's be honest, we've all seen marriages in this industry fall apart faster than a cheap umbrella in a rainstorm. Faith smiled politely, clearly used to questions about her marriage. Well, Joy, I think the secret is that there is no secret. It's work, it's commitment, it's choosing each other every single day, even when it's hard. Joy nodded, but wasn't done. But come on, you're both incredibly successful, both traveling constantly, both dealing with the pressures of fame. There have been rumors over the years, tabloid stories. How do you deal with that constant scrutiny? Or do you just ignore it all? The table got quieter. Whoopi glanced at Joy with a look that seemed to say, "Where are you going with this?" But Joy kept her eyes on Faith. Faith's smile tightened just slightly. The first sign that she wasn't entirely comfortable with where this was heading. I think anyone in the public eye deals with rumors and tabloid nonsense, Faith replied. Her voice still measured, but with a slight edge creeping in. The key is knowing what's true and what's just noise designed to sell magazines. My husband and I have built a life together based on trust and respect, and that foundation is stronger than anything someone can print on a grocery store checkout. Joy leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Sure, but don't you think there's usually some fire where there's smoke? I mean, these stories don't just come out of nowhere. Someone talks, someone sees something, and suddenly it's everywhere. Faith's posture changed. She sat up straighter, and her eyes locked onto Joy's with an intensity that made everyone in the studio suddenly pay very close attention. Joy, are you asking me a question about my marriage? Or are you making a statement about what you think you know about my marriage? The audience went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Whoopi jumped in quickly, trying to redirect. I think what Joy is trying to say is that being in the spotlight comes with challenges that most people don't understand. But Faith wasn't letting it go. No, Whoopi, I appreciate that, but I want Joy to clarify what she's implying here. Because if we're going to have this conversation, let's have it honestly. Joy, never one to back down, shrugged. I'm not implying anything. Faith, I'm just saying that the public sees what they see, they read what they read, and sometimes celebrities get defensive when perfectly reasonable questions are asked about things that are already in the public domain. Faith let out a short laugh, but there was no humor in it. The public domain. That's interesting. So, because someone with a camera phone takes a picture of my husband talking to another woman at a restaurant and a tabloid decides to turn it into a scandal that makes it the public domain, that makes it fair game for you to sit here and question the integrity of my marriage on national television. Joy held up her hands. I didn't question the integrity of anything. I asked how you deal with scrutiny. You're the one who seems to be getting upset. I'm not upset, Joy. I'm clarified, Faith shot back. There's a difference. I'm clarifying that just because I chose a career in the public eye doesn't mean every aspect of my private life is up for debate or speculation, especially when that speculation is based on literally nothing but gossip. Sunny tried to intervene. I think we can all agree that celebrities face unique challenges when it comes to privacy. Faith turned to Sunny, her expression softening slightly. Thank you, Sunny. And yes, we do. But what frustrates me is this idea that we're supposed to just sit here and smile and nod when people make insinuations about our lives, our families, our relationships, and we're supposed to be grateful for the opportunity to defend ourselves against things that aren't even true. Joy wasn't backing down. But Faith, you have to admit that when you're in the public eye, when you make millions of dollars because people buy your albums and come to your concerts, there's a trade-off. You don't get to have it both ways. You don't get to be a public figure when it benefits you, and then cry privacy when the questions get uncomfortable. The tension in the room was palpable now. The other co-hosts were exchanging glances, clearly unsure whether to jump in or let this play out. The audience was completely silent, watching this unfold like a tennis match, heads turning from Faith to Joy and back again. Faith took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was calm but firm, every word deliberate. Joy, I'm going to say this as clearly as I can. There is a massive difference between being a public figure and having every single aspect of your personal life dissected, analyzed, and turned into entertainment for people who don't know you, have never met you, and have no stake in your actual well-being. When I walk on stage and sing, that's public. When I do interviews about my work, that's public. When I'm at home with my family, when I'm having dinner with my husband, when I'm living my life as a human being and not as Faith Hill, the celebrity, that is not public. And the fact that some people, including apparently some people at this table, can't understand that distinction is deeply troubling to me. Joy leaned forward again. So, you think I'm out of line for asking you about things that have been widely reported? I think you're out of line for treating gossip and widely reported as if they're the same thing. Faith replied without missing a beat. Something being widely reported doesn't make it true. It just makes it widely reported. Whoopi tried again to steer the conversation. Okay, let's take a breath here. I think we're all getting a little heated. But Faith wasn't done. No, Whoopi, I don't think we need to take a breath. I think we need to finish this conversation because clearly Joy has some thoughts she wants to share. And I'd rather we do this now, openly. Instead of having it become another soundbite that gets twisted and turned into something it's not. Joy spread her hands. Fine, you want me to be direct? I'll be direct. You and your husband have been in the tabloids multiple times over the years. There have been stories about fights, about separations, about other people. Now, maybe those stories are all completely false. Maybe every single one of them is made up. But when the same types of stories keep appearing, people start to wonder. That's just human nature. Faith's eyes flashed. Human nature or tabloid nature? Because there's a difference. Joy. Human nature is wanting to believe the best in people. Tabloid nature is wanting to believe the worst because it sells better. And what you're doing right now is feeding into that exact problem. Joy sat back, her expression shifting to something between defensive and defiant. I'm feeding into the problem. Faith, I'm a talk show host. My job is to ask questions that people are thinking about. If I don't ask them, someone else will. Would you rather I pretend like these things don't exist? Faith shook her head slowly, her frustration evident but controlled. Your job is to ask questions, yes, but your job should also include some level of responsibility about how you frame those questions and what you're really trying to accomplish by asking them. Because right now, it doesn't feel like you're asking me about how I deal with fame. It feels like you're trying to get me to either confirm or deny tabloid garbage that has no basis in reality. And when I refuse to play that game, you're acting like I'm being difficult. The audience was completely absorbed now. This wasn't scripted banter or playful disagreement. This was two strong women with very different perspectives going head to head, and neither was willing to back down. Sarah N., who had been quiet for several minutes, finally spoke up. Faith, I think I understand your frustration, Sarah began carefully. But can I ask you this? Do you think there's ever a version of this conversation that feels fair to you? Because Joy has a point that when you're in the public eye, people are going to be curious about your life beyond just your work. Where's the line? Faith turned to Sarah, and her expression softened slightly, appreciating what seemed like a genuine attempt to understand rather than provoke. Sarah, that's actually a really good question, and I appreciate you asking it that way. The line, for me, is intent. If someone asks me how I balance my career and my marriage, that's one thing. That's a reasonable question about the logistics and emotional work of maintaining a relationship while both people are pursuing demanding careers. But when someone starts with the premise that my marriage must be troubled because tabloids say so, and then asks me to defend it, that's completely different. One is curiosity, the other is accusation, dressed up as curiosity. Joy jumped back in. But I didn't accuse you of anything, Faith. I asked you how you deal with rumors. That's not an accusation. The way you asked it was an accusation. Faith countered immediately. You said there's fire where there's smoke. You said these stories don't come from nowhere. Those aren't neutral statements, Joy. Those are statements that suggest you believe there's truth to the rumors, and you're just waiting for me to either confirm it or explain it away. Joy threw up her hands in exasperation. So what am I supposed to do? Just never ask celebrities about their personal lives. Just stick to softball questions about their latest album or movie. No, Faith said firmly. You're supposed to ask questions like a journalist, not like a gossip columnist. There's a difference between saying, tell me about your marriage and what makes it work, versus saying, your marriage has been the subject of constant tabloid speculation, so what's really going on? One approaches me as a person with something valuable to share. The other approaches me as a suspect in some scandal that only exists in tabloid headlines. Whoopi, sensing that this was spiraling and could go on indefinitely, tried once more to redirect. I think we're getting into some really important territory here about media responsibility and celebrity privacy. Faith, you've been incredibly patient with this conversation, and I think a lot of people watching can relate to feeling like their lives are being judged by people who don't know them. Faith nodded at Whoopi. Thank you, Whoopi. And yes, I think that's something everyone can relate to, not just celebrities. We all know what it's like to have people make assumptions about us based on incomplete information or outright lies. The difference is, when it happens to most people, it doesn't happen on a national stage with millions of people watching. But Joy wasn't ready to let it go. Okay, but Faith, you keep talking about tabloids like they're completely making things up out of thin air. But tabloids get sued when they publish lies. They have legal departments. They're not just printing complete fiction. Faith leaned forward now, her voice rising slightly for the first time. Joy, tabloids get sued all the time, and they factor those lawsuits into their business model. They know that most celebrities won't sue because it costs too much money, takes too much time, and generates more attention to the false story. So they print whatever they think will sell magazines. Throw in some anonymous source, said or purportedly or allegedly, and then they're legally covered, even if the entire story is garbage. And you know this. Everyone in media knows this. So for you to sit here and act like tabloid stories have some inherent credibility just because they were printed is either incredibly naive or incredibly disingenuous. The other co-hosts were silent now. This had gone far beyond a typical daytime television disagreement. Joy's face flushed slightly, and her voice took on a sharper edge. So now I'm naive or disingenuous. That's what we're doing now. I'm saying your argument is one or the other, Faith clarified. I'm not calling you names, Joy. I'm pointing out that the logic you're using, that tabloids must have some credibility because they exist, is flawed. And I think you know it's flawed. Joy crossed her arms tightly. What I know is that I've been doing this for decades, and I've learned that where there's consistent reporting, even in tabloids, there's usually something going on. Maybe not exactly what they're reporting, but something. And celebrities love to act like they're completely innocent victims when, a lot of times, they're playing games with the media themselves. Faith's expression hardened. Are you accusing me of playing games with the media? I'm saying it happens, Joy replied. I'm saying celebrities leak stories about themselves all the time. They tip off paparazzi about where they'll be. They use the tabloids when it benefits them, and then complain about invasion of privacy when it doesn't. That's just how the industry works. Faith stared at Joy for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet but intense. Joy, I have never, not once in my entire career, called a tabloid to tip them off about where I would be. I have never leaked a story about myself or my family. I have never used the media as a tool to manipulate public perception. And the fact that you're sitting here suggesting that I have, or that celebrities like me have, without any evidence whatsoever, is exactly the kind of irresponsible journalism that makes people distrust media. Joy uncrossed her arms and leaned forward. I didn't say you specifically did those things. You implied it, Faith shot back. You said celebrities do it, in response to me defending my privacy, which means you're suggesting I might be one of those celebrities. If that's not what you meant, then you need to be more careful with your words, because right now, you're doing exactly what tabloids do. You're making vague insinuations that allow you to suggest something without actually having to prove it. The tension was reaching a breaking point. Sunny Hostin, who had been watching this escalate, finally spoke up with a legal perspective. I think what's happening here is that we're seeing two very different views of what's fair in public discourse. Faith is arguing for a right to privacy that she feels she's entitled to as a human being. Joy is arguing that public figures have implicitly given up some of that privacy by choosing careers that put them in the spotlight. Both perspectives have validity. Faith turned to Sunny. I appreciate that, Sunny, but I have to push back on something. I didn't give up my right to privacy by becoming a singer. I chose a career where my work is public. That doesn't mean I consented to having my entire life become public property. That's not a trade I ever agreed to make, and frankly, it's not a trade anyone should have to make. Joy interjected. But that's not realistic, Faith. You can't control what people are interested in. Once you become famous, people want to know about your life. That's just reality. People wanting to know about my life and people having a right to know about my life are two completely different things. Faith responded. And the media, including this show, has a choice about whether they feed that curiosity in a responsible way or whether they treat people's private lives like entertainment. Joy's voice rose. This show has always been about discussing current events and topics that people care about. If people care about celebrity relationships and celebrity scandals, why shouldn't we talk about them? Because words have consequences. Joy, Faith said, her voice matching Joy's intensity now. Because when you sit here on national television and question whether someone's marriage is real or whether the rumors might be true, you're not just talking about abstract concepts. You're talking about real people with real families who have to deal with the fallout of that conversation. My daughters have to hear people at school talking about whether their parents are getting divorced because someone on The View decided it was an interesting topic for discussion. That's the consequence of treating people's lives like they're just content for your show. Joy's expression shifted, something flickering across her face that might have been recognition of the weight of Faith's words, but she pressed on. Faith, I'm sorry if your daughters have had to deal with difficult conversations. I really am. But you can't put that all on me or on this show. We're not the ones creating the tabloid stories. We're just discussing things that are already out there in the culture. Faith shook her head, her frustration now fully visible. You're not just discussing things, Joy, you're legitimizing them. When a respected talk show host on a major network brings up tabloid rumors as if they're worthy of serious conversation, you're telling your audience that these rumors deserve attention. You're giving them credibility they don't deserve. And then, when people like me push back, we're made to look defensive or like we're hiding something. It's a no-win situation that you've created. Whoopi tried again to mediate. I think both of you are coming from places of principle here. Joy believes in asking tough questions and not treating celebrities with kid gloves. Faith believes in protecting her family and her privacy. Those things are going to clash sometimes. But Faith was looking directly at Joy now, and there was something in her eyes that suggested she was done being diplomatic. Joy, let me ask you something. Do you have family? People you love who you want to protect from public scrutiny? Joy nodded. Of course I do. And if someone went on television and started speculating about your relationships, about whether your marriage was real or whether there were problems based on nothing but gossip they'd read somewhere, how would you feel? Faith asked. Joy paused, seeming to consider the question. I'd probably be upset, but I'm not a celebrity. I didn't choose a career that puts my personal life in the spotlight. Neither did I, Faith said, her voice rising with passion now. I chose a career where I sing songs. That's it. I didn't sign up to have every moment of my private life analyzed and picked apart. And the fact that you keep suggesting that I did, that somehow, by being successful at my job, I consented to having no boundaries, is insulting. It's insulting to me. It's insulting to every person in the entertainment industry who just wants to do their work without having their entire existence turned into a spectacle. Joy leaned back. Her arms crossed again. So, what do you want, Faith? You want us to never talk about celebrities' personal lives. You want entertainment journalism to just disappear. I want respect, Faith said simply, her voice suddenly quieter but no less intense. I want the same respect that any person deserves. I want media personalities to think about the impact of their words before they speak them. I want people like you to understand that the person sitting across from you isn't a character or a storyline. They're a human being with feelings and a family and a life that matters beyond whatever content you need to fill your show. The studio was completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen. Sarah N. looked close to tears, clearly moved by the emotion in Faith's voice. Sunny was nodding slowly, seeming to understand the deeper point Faith was making. Joy, for the first time since this conversation began, looked uncertain. When she spoke, her voice had lost some of its combative edge. I hear what you're saying, Faith. I do. But I still think there's a fundamental disagreement here about what's fair game when someone chooses to be in the public eye. Faith took a deep breath, composing herself. Joy, let me try to explain this one more way. When you go to work every day, you're Joy Behar, the talk show host. You're smart, you're funny, you ask provocative questions, you entertain people. That's your job. But when you go home at night, you're just Joy. You're a wife, a mother, a friend, a person who has private thoughts and private moments and private struggles that have nothing to do with your public persona. You get to have that separation. You get to have a life outside of this studio that belongs to you and only you. All I'm asking for is that same courtesy. When I'm on stage or doing interviews about my work, I'm Faith Hill, the artist. When I'm home with my family, I'm just Faith, and that Faith, the private one. deserves the same protection and respect that your private self deserves. Joy was quiet for a moment, and for the first time, she seemed to be genuinely considering Faith's perspective, rather than preparing her next argument. "I can understand that," she said finally. "I can understand wanting that separation. But Faith, you have to understand that it's not just media people like me who blur those lines. It's the public. It's the fans. It's the culture we live in where people feel like they have a relationship with celebrities because they listen to their music or watch their movies." "I do understand that," Faith replied. "And I'm not saying it's easy or that there are simple answers, but what I am saying is that people in your position, people with platforms and influence, have a responsibility to push back against that culture instead of feeding into it. You have the power to set a different tone, to ask thoughtful questions that respect boundaries while still being interesting and engaging. You don't have to choose between being a good journalist and being a decent human being. Those things can coexist." Sunny nodded emphatically. "I think that's a really important point, Faith. As journalists and media personalities, we do have an ethical obligation to think about the impact of our coverage, especially when it comes to people's private lives." Joy glanced at Sunny, then back at Faith. "Look, I'm not going to sit here and apologize for doing my job. I ask tough questions. That's what I do. But I also want to be fair. And if you feel like I crossed a line today, then I want to acknowledge that. That wasn't my intention." Faith studied Joy's face, trying to determine if this was a genuine acknowledgement or just an attempt to end an uncomfortable conversation. After a moment, she nodded slowly. "I appreciate you saying that, Joy, and I want to be clear that I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job. I'm just asking you to consider that the questions you ask and the way you ask them have real consequences for real people. That's all." Whoopi, sensing that they'd reached something close to resolution, jumped in. "I think this has been an incredibly important conversation, and I'm glad we had it, even though it got heated. This is what The View is supposed to be about, having real discussions about things that matter." Faith turned to Whoopi with a small smile. "Thank you, Whoopi, and thank you to all of you for letting me speak my mind. I know I got passionate, but these issues matter to me. My family matters to me, and I think protecting people's dignity and privacy matters to all of us, whether we're famous or not."
What happens when
Sarah reached over and squeezed Faith's hand. "Thank you for being so honest and vulnerable with us, Faith.
Nobody saw coming.
I think a lot of people watching are going to relate to what you said about wanting to be seen as a whole person, not just a public figure. Joy, still looking somewhat chastened, but not entirely defeated, added, "I do want to say that I respect your talent and your career. Faith, I always have. And if my questions came across as attacking your marriage or your character, that genuinely wasn't my goal. I was trying to have a conversation about celebrity culture, but I hear you that it felt personal and hurtful." Faith nodded. "Thank you for saying that, Joy. I know these conversations aren't easy, and I know you're doing your job. I just hope that maybe this discussion can lead to some reflection about how we all, media and public figures alike, can do better at treating each other with respect and compassion." The conversation gradually shifted after that, with Whoopi guiding them toward lighter topics. They talked briefly about Faith's music again, about her hopes for the future, about the joy she finds in performing, but the energy in the studio had fundamentally changed. Everyone watching knew they'd just witnessed something unusual, something raw and real that doesn't often happen on daytime television. As the segment came to a close and Faith stood to leave, the audience applauded. It wasn't the enthusiastic, cheerful applause from when she'd arrived. It was something different, something more thoughtful. These were people who'd just watched a masterclass in standing up for yourself with grace and strength, who'd seen someone refuse to back down when defending what mattered to them. Faith waved to the audience, shook hands with each of the co-hosts, and walked off the stage with her head held high. The moment the cameras cut and the show went to commercial, The entire studio seemed to exhale collectively. People pulled out their phones immediately, knowing that what they'd just witnessed was going to be everywhere within hours, and they were right. By the time Faith left the building, clips of the exchange were already circulating online. People were dissecting every word, every expression, every moment of tension. Some praised Faith for standing her ground and speaking truth about media responsibility. Others defended Joy's right to ask difficult questions. The debate that had started on the View stage had spread to millions of viewers, all of them grappling with the same questions about privacy, fame, respect, and the price of celebrity in the modern world. What made this moment so powerful wasn't just the clash between two strong personalities. If you made it this far, make sure you subscribe to the channel and drop a comment below. What do you think? Was Joy out of line with her questions? Or was Faith being too sensitive?